Hello, everyone. You hear me well? Just to check. Do you hear me well, Masha? Ruben says yes. Okay, good. All right. Welcome, everyone. Oh, okay, good. Good to hear. So there is some delay then, I guess, no? Thank you. It's not a painting, it's a wallpaper. Okay, so welcome, everyone. I'm just going to start, and I see that people are dropping in bit by bit. So today's webinar is about the shoulder. I'm going to go into the details of the shoulder and especially in certain movements of the shoulder, because the shoulder is a very elaborate joint and you can make a lot of movements because the arm is connected to the shoulder. And what the shoulder girdle can do are also some movements apart from the arm. So before we go and analyze the shoulder joint, I want you to join with me at home to make some movements with your arm, like to find out how many movements you can make with your arm. So you can do it now, even though I don't see you, but that doesn't matter. It's just for you to kind of get a feel around, like, hey, what kind of movements can I do with my arm? So now I'm going to do it with you. So the arm, if we're just going to move the arm because we want to analyze what is making the movement to be able to get a clear idea of the shoulder, and then also to make the link to either a yin or a yang yoga pose when that can cause any trouble, meaning the shape of the bone. If you feel any tension, then it is more due to the tissues surrounding the joint of the shoulder. But if at some point you cannot move any further and you feel definite pressure in the area where you're going to move towards, then it's called compression. So, yes, a little delay. Okay, I can start, no? Because I was already starting. Just to check. Wait. Oh, okay. So, to go into the movements of the arm, so the humerus, that is called this part, the bone is called the humerus of the arm. So we can make a movement that is called flexion. So when you would be standing, your arm goes upwards. You can make a movement called extension, bringing the arm backwards. You can make a movement that is called abduction. So the arm from the midline goes out to the side. And the moment you bring your arms together above your head, that is adduction, adduction. So here it is abduction and this is adduction. So that is two movements already. So you have one flexion, two extension, abduction is three, and four would be adduction. And then five, external rotation. So your humerus, the inside of your arm, rotates forward. So that is external rotation, or the inside turns towards the body and backwards. So that is internal rotation. So, and that is the sixth movement. But the arm, like I said before, is not alone. It is connected to the shoulder girdle. And the shoulder girdle consists out of three bones. Sometimes they mention a different bone in anatomy books, but I use the humerus, the clavicle, and the scapula to indicate the shoulder girdle, because sometimes the sternum is also mentioned, but that is not moving. And we are interested when we do yoga in the parts that are moving. So the clavicle and the shoulder blade and the humerus together, they form the shoulder girdle. So the moment you are lifting your arm, and without lifting up your shoulder girdle, so in this case, I'm going to talk about the flexion of the arm and the adduction of the arm. So try at home as well to see how far you can come with your arm without lifting up your shoulder. So don't go to the side with your arm, but go forward and up. And then up until you can also place one hand on your shoulder, up until you feel that your shoulder goes up. That's where you stop. So in my body, my flexion is about here. So looking at it from the side, if I go up with my arm, and here, actually in this point, if I go further, look at my shoulder here, it's lifted up. So I go from the front, I move here. So this stays low, this is not moving. But now I go further, and you see that the shoulder is lifted up. Yeah. So what happens there? I'll get back to that in a minute. So here with the abduction, the same thing. So I'm moving to C up until I can abduct until my shoulder is lifted. Yeah. So here, now it's not abducting anymore because I go closer to the midline. So now we call it adduction. But you can see that here, this is doable for me. But then I become lifted, or I lift up my shoulder girdle if I bring my arm up higher to the side. And here I'm not changing the position of my arm. I keep the palm of my hand facing the same way as if I would lift it here. So what is happening in the shoulder girdle when you are lifting up here and then the shoulder goes up, or when you're lifting up here and then the shoulder goes up? Of course, this is not a problem in that sense that the shoulders lift up, but I just want to wrap your mind around it that there are two things happening here. One is that the arm is moving, but then a second part of the joint, which is the shoulder girdle, is also getting involved. And the moment the shoulder of the clavicle lifts up, you can also try that at home. It's lifting up. This is called elevation. So now the movement is just coming from the shoulder girdle, meaning the clavicle and the scapula are moving upwards. This is called elevation. Yeah, there is also depression. So you can push your clavicle and your shoulder blades down. That is depression. Here, my arm is not moving. Then there is also another movement that is called protraction. So now your shoulder blades move apart, and actually you're pushing your clavicle forward. The other movement is retraction. The shoulder blades move towards the spine, and actually you bring your clavicles out and up a bit, but they elongate on this. Well, elongate, the bone doesn't elongate, but it is this idea of elongating this area here. And then the fifth and the sixth movement is the movement that your shoulder blade and your clavicle will make with the help of the humerus. So it is due to the flexion of your humerus, your clavicle gets elevated. And you can see that if you want to place your finger here within this area, just above your clavicle, keep it there. And now you lift your arm up, and then you feel, ouch, that your finger gets pinched in between the area of the neck and the area of your clavicle. So that means that the moment your arm goes up, your shoulder girdle, meaning your clavicle and your scapula, is lifted up. But because you now do it with one arm, this is not elevation, but the clavicle moves up, but your scapula actually rotates. It rotates downwards. So that is called lateral rotation of the scapula. If you bring your arm backwards, you actually push your clavicle forward, and then your scapula is pushed inwards and upwards. So why is this so important to realize? Because that influences your understanding of the shoulder. And it is all determined by the bones. So I hope you can see this well. So the clavicle is here, and this is your scapula is here, and this is your humerus. And there is this little tiny part of the bone which is coming from the scapula here. They call this the spine of the scapula, but it's a protruding part of the bone. And this kind of roofy, like bone is called the acromion process. And the shape of the bones is different on each body. So after 20, your bones are kind of shaped, set, unless you break something. But other than that, the shape of the bone is determined. If you do a lot of exercise where the tendons attach, then there the bone can become a bit thicker. But apart from that, the shape of the bone stays the same. So here, what we were doing before is flexing the humerus, and then you can see that in this point, I hope it stays, in this point here, the head of the humerus is compressing with this part of the bone, the acromion process. And then look what happens if I lift his arm further up. Do you see? Then the shoulder blade moves out to the side, and then the clavicle is lifted up. So it is due to the compression that is occurring here in the humerus with the acromion process. That is the reason why the shoulder lifts up. So when you do a position, for example, with your arms above the head and your shoulders are lifted, and if you want the shoulders to stay low, realize if it is not the tension of the muscles that you're contracting to lift up the shoulder, but it's actually just your humerus bone lifting up your shoulder girdle. Yeah, so if you want to keep your shoulders away from your ears, what you can do is, for example, bend the elbows or go a bit not so high up, but stay a bit forward with the arms so that the area of the shoulder can stay low. But as long as there is no tension in the muscles by lifting up here, and it's not causing you unwanted tension there, then it's not a problem that the shoulders are lifted. It just doesn't mean that you're tensing up your shoulders. It is because you are actually lifting your bones up, and therefore the rest that is covering this area is also lifted up. Sometimes this compression can cause a painful compression. So with the poses that I'm going to go into in a minute, I will give you some variations of like how you can play to avoid this compression. Because basically, we've tested it with allowing the arm to go forward. But if you bend your arm, and I turn the skeleton a little bit, well, don't mind his head. If you bend your arm a bit and it can go out to the side, then you can see that the shoulder girdle is not lifted so much, but it stays down. So depending on the shape of this tiny little protrusion of the scapula determines how fast you're going to lift the shoulders up or not. And this is the same case when you're doing abduction. So then from abduction and then going to adduction. Again, you can see here that the humerus is lifting due to the compression with the acromion process, is lifting the shoulder girdle up. So also, whether you go in from it from the front or whether you go in from it from the side, still you can create this uplifting sensation in the shoulder. Yeah. So that is called then elevation and depression. So if you want to keep the shoulders down, you have to avoid getting compression with this area of your shoulder. So meaning maybe to go a little bit out to the side. So in poses that this occurs is in a yin pose, for example, Anahatasana. Yeah, or in a yang pose, for example, downward facing dog. Just checking. Okay, yeah. So I hope this is clear up until now. Before I continue, if you have any questions, please let me know. No. Okay. So in Anahatasana, where we're actually doing flexion of the arms. So we always say, okay, you can start on your hands and knees, and then you dip down with your chest towards the floor. And then here, a lot of people suffer from pressure here on top that doesn't either allow them to go and dip down with their chest towards the floor to get an opening in the front of the body and some pressure along the spine, they cannot get there. And they're kind of hanging in that compression, which is painful. And that's something you don't want. So then you don't get the function out of the pose. So then an option could be, for example, separating your arms apart and then allowing yourself to sink down. Or you can bend your elbows. In this way, your arms go away from this point and place your hands underneath your forehead. Sometimes people actually like to bring their elbows a bit closer together, bring the palms of the hands together, because now instead of this pointy part of the acromion process is not painfully compressing into the muscles of the deltoid here, but actually you're kind of placing your humerus underneath that little roof that I just showed you on the skeleton. So then here they can also get the benefit. And even then, sometimes people don't get the benefit from it. So then you can also try with one arm. Because if you do one arm variation, your body has the opportunity to kind of turn or twist away. Because with two arms in this position, you are not allowing your shoulders to kind of go in and turn away a little bit from the compression. It is forced to stay in the center because both of your arms are doing the same thing. So if you're twisting and doing it with one arm, and you can support here with your hand on the floor, you can also lower your hips down. The hips don't have to stay high to be able to get that opening, but then it is just orientated on one side of the body. So those can be options. And then, of course, you can also use props, maybe underneath your arms, moving away to the side, bending the elbows. Those are all the options that I gave to you. And sometimes people have trouble in the back, but that is more about the hips and the back than it is about the shoulders. So, and as in a yang practice, this pose really looks like downward facing dog. You can do the same there. So if you come into your downward facing dog and you're pressing your heels as far down as you can, if you cannot, that's okay. But we're talking about the shoulders now. So also here, sometimes people are working really hard. Their elbows are bending outside and they're trying to turn their arms basically underneath to get that same position as with the elbows close to each other in Anahatasana, to put it under that acromion process, that little roof-like bone, to be able to stay in your downward facing dog in a relaxed way instead of really, really working hard and um, actually building muscles instead of relaxing, that you can get the benefits. So also here, you can play with your hand position, maybe turn them a little bit apart, turn the hands out. Maybe you need to narrow your downward dog a bit so that you can put more weight into the feet. If playing with the position of the arm more out to the side or turning the hand out is not enough to be able to get that compression feeling away, or to take that compression feeling away in the shoulder area. Because in the downward dog, you cannot play with bending your arms, or what you can play with bringing the arms a little bit closer together. That can also be something, but then your shoulders probably will lift here. So that is what is happening in a downward facing dog or in Anahatasana, yin pose. So any moment where you're lifting your arms up and they're asking you to keep the arms close to the ears and your shoulders lift, it not necessarily has to do with tension in the body. It can actually be skeletal due to the shape of your bones, that it's just a simple thing like your humerus compressing with your shoulder girdle with this little rooftop here, and therefore your shoulder girdle is lifted up, not necessarily due to tension. Or sometimes this can create tension of the muscles because there is no space for them to go. So options then can be widening the arms, bending the elbows, taking the arms a bit further back or more forward. Any movement that helps you to get around this area here. So the same we can do, for example, in Bananasana, which is then adduction of the arm. And I had written down another pose, yeah, or cow face arms, for example. Yeah, let's do that one first. So here, you're bringing one arm up and the other one goes back. So what the other arm does, we're going to do in another webinar, because that is internal rotation with extension. Here, we're doing flexion, and whether or not you're able to grab your arms, but again, here on the top of the shoulder, you can experience that painful compression there. So you can also play with your arm, maybe your elbow to the side, or not allowing your arm to go all the way up, to kind of go around that bony part. If you're not able to reach with your hands, you can also use a belt. And then you have some more playing room as well to play with the arm position. So before I go to the adduction poses, are there any questions here about the flexion and the acromion process? Okay, great. Oh, well, Teresa, I can help you out with your ankle to heal properly, but this webinar is specifically about the shoulder. So if you want, just send me an email and then we can talk about your ankle, because that's a different area of the body that I don't want to go into. Okay, so that is all clear. Then now we go to poses in which you're gonna adduct. So, for example, you go to the side in any side poses, yeah, where you kind of reach out to the side. And then you see sometimes people when the arm stays bent, or they want to go forward with the arm, or in triangle pose, then the arm is like this, but then there are some variations where you're allowed to go there, but then they feel the compression there. Yeah. So they're the same. Allow yourself to play with your body. Allow your arm to go in a different position that you still keep the function of the pose. So in this case, feeling the side of the body and a stretch maybe all the way up in the armpit and then apart from the leg, but kind of see how you can position yourself or maybe hold your arm in such a way so that you avoid that painful compression in the shoulder area, but you still maintain the stretch or the strengthening of the pose that you're doing. Yeah. So here also in wild thing pose, for example, when you are in this position coming from downward facing dog, and then it's kind of nice to go into wild thing. So here it all depends on your possibilities that you have in your shoulder. If that bone, the shape of the bone there, allows you to make that movement. So here you can play with your body to position your arm in such a way in a connection with the shoulder to go around that point. And now my mic goes. So you don't want to kind of go into the area where you're hanging in that joint. Specifically, when you're doing a yang practice, you don't want to hang into the joints. You want to be able to make use of your muscles. And if you cannot use your muscles because the compression is kind of, the bony part is compressing into the muscles, that is very painful and can cause actually injuries. So to avoid getting into injuries, either in your yin or your yang practice, you really have to be aware of what is happening in the shoulder and then adjust accordingly so that you can still get the benefits of the pose, but you're not injuring yourself. And that is actually functional practicing, instead of, aesthetically just trying to copy the pose how the teacher does it or how it is depicted on the picture, but to really get into your body and know a little bit about anatomy, then you can already start to figure it out actually. Like, oh, right, this is bone compressing actually into my muscles, and it has a reaction of my body to lift, therefore. So that is actually the whole idea about practicing function. At the same time, I'm checking out the questions. Can you bend the knee in a downward facing dog? Yeah, of course. Why not? You could. I mean, it depends on, do you do that because you want to avoid sensation in the shoulder, or is it because you cannot straighten your legs out? Because that is important. Yeah. So, Veronica, for you, the same. So, how do you teach downward dog for people who complain about their shoulders? So, you can play with the width of your downward dog to be able to have less or more weight onto your hands. Like the perfect picture would be that the weight is equally divided. But if due to the shape of your bones, you cannot straighten your arms completely, or due to the shape of your acromion process that is creating compression there, then you will see that people start to round their upper back. They want to bend their knees. What happens then is that all the weight goes forward in their arms. And then if we say, give the cue, oh yeah, relax in this pose and stretch your body out. But if they look like this, they're not relaxing. They're using a lot of muscular effort to keep themselves like this. So in bending the knees in this situation doesn't help, because then more weight is brought into the arms and actually into the area of the shoulders where they don't want to have it. So what I do when I teach the shoulder or the downward facing dog is allow the students to play with their body. So starting first in, for example, dangling position or hanging forward, and then walking forward. And then see what they feel. If they feel the function of the stretch in the calf muscles and maybe also in the hamstrings. If they can keep their heels down, well, this has to do with also the flexion ability of your ankle. And again, that's bone too. So not always tension is happening in the ankle for you to be able to do that. So then they are going to play, secondly, with the position of the hands to be able to see how they can release tension or pain in their shoulders. So turning them out, or turning forward, or closer together, or further apart. That depends. If it still is quite painful, because you can see here I'm making an angle of flexion with my arm. If that is still painful, then most of the people, they really benefit from making your downward dog narrower, not so wide. Yeah, so walking closer with your hands towards the feet. And then it changes for the legs. Maybe it's more for the calf muscles then, but then they're not working so hard to keep themselves up, and also they don't have painful compression here. So it all depends on what kind of people you have in your group and what flexion they're able to do. And then, but if this is the movement that they have and they also start to bend, then it will be a workout, the downward facing dog. And they will get really strong shoulders and arms because they cannot either straighten their arm out or not create too much flexion with their arm. And if it stays painful, then I would just start doing different poses to kind of work around the shoulders. So I hope that helps, Veronica. So play with the width. Okay. Play with the width, play with the arm position, and that will kind of help them to go around it. But first of all, it is important to analyze what is happening. Is it that they have the painful compression, or is it tension? If it's tension and therefore they cannot lift their arm up, then it would be felt here. If it's compression, then it would be felt on top of the shoulder, because that's where the arm is going towards. So always ask your students, like, hey, what is it that you feel and where do you feel it? Because then you can get an idea about where the problem is. What about rotating the radius there? Yeah, again, that is a different part of the body, but yeah, you're also using your radius bone. You have the ulna here and the radius, and because you're making this movement, which is called pronation of the radius, so some people cannot make the pronation all the way down to the floor. So that would look like this. And that influences all the way up into the shoulder. So if you go down onto your elbows and then try to place your hands flat on the floor, that is the movement that you have to be able to do to be able to go into a downward facing dog as well. If you're here and you cannot bring the palms out, what has to move are the elbows. Yeah. And this has right away an effect in the shoulder. So if you then go into a downward facing dog, it would look like this. And then your arms internally rotate and then cause tension in the shoulder. So also there, you could try to abduct your hands, or you can turn them out to take the pronation out. So here you're pronating, or you can leave a little bit the pronation by turning your hands out. And maybe that might then be doable for them to do the downward facing dog. Yeah, Teresa. No, I mean, if you need to do more yin due to the ankle, um, it all depends on what is happening with your ankle. So if you can send me an email, because that is really a specific thing, and then the downward dog, I think there might be too much weight on the ankle. So Sergio, yeah, in the downward dog, I explained what about rotating the radius there in the downward dog. And using a belt? What do you mean, Adriana? Using a belt in a downward facing dog? Uh, I don't understand, Sergio, what you're saying. Because the opening of the elbow to the front, meaning the elbow bone towards the back. But then it's a rotation of the arm. So if you mean this movement, then you're rotating externally from the humerus. This is from the radius, that's supination and pronation. So it is a different movement altogether. Yeah, Teresa, about your ankle, I mean, I would have to know like what is going on with your ankle, what movements can you not do, and which ones can you do. But like I said, this is about the shoulder. So we can talk about your ankle, but it's better to send me an email so that we can talk about it in more detail. To be able to put pressure against it from either the wrist, underarms, or upper arm. Oh, you mean a belt around the arms, Adriana, in downward facing dog? Well, if you're using a belt, you really have to be sure that because then the arms are held in a certain position using the belt, and then they are not free to go away from the compression that they experience here on the top. So, however you're using the belts, it should not be by holding their arms in the position that is creating still the compression. That then is not helpful. But if it's due to something else that they lack the strength to keep their arms there and they don't have compression here, then yes, a belt might help. Yeah. But like I said, like when you're using a belt, like in Iyengar, I mean, sometimes then the body is forced into a movement that actually a certain specific body cannot make. So it is always the starting point to see, hey, what is this person feeling? Does it feel painful compression due to the movement? Then I would not use any props to kind of force the body to go into that movement more. Then I would go away from it and adapt the pose so that that is not felt anymore in order to be able to access the muscles that you need for the pose that you're doing. Rotating the elbow like an archer. Yeah, so I think I answered that, Sergio, didn't I? Okay. Do you have any sequences for releasing the shoulders? Yeah, we have a lot of shoulder sequences on EkhartYoga. So you can do any positions of yin or more yang like poses, but you want to hold the poses for a period of time. So you're basically doing all the movements that the arms can do and the shoulder girdle can do to be able to release the different muscles that are surrounding here. So if you are interested in learning about how the movements of the shoulders work in more detail, then, for example, Yin and Anatomy teacher training is a very good one to start with because it's a 50-hour one, and we specify on Yin yoga poses. But of course, you can apply the anatomy that is talked about there also for Yang like practices because we take our body to the mat in any yoga practice. So that is then also very useful. Yeah, exactly, Adriana. Yeah, no, not just for help, not force. Yeah, exactly. So as long as it helps the person, then it's a good thing. But make sure you check with them that they're not when you're using the belt, then how they feel it. And then when that is okay, you're good to go. Yeah. It's a challenge, huh? But this is the thing. I mean, I can give you several variations, but then when you talk to your students or when you're with each student is very different, has a very different body. Um, the bones are shaped differently, therefore the muscles that attach to there are used differently as well. So actually, you just have to go one by one to kind of find out and see what works for that person the best. Okay, great, Sergio. Yeah. And if you want to know more about upper body poses that can release tension, for example, then there is also this Yin and Meridian teacher training, the 30-hour one. And there we go into detail also about the movements of the shoulders again, and then specifically applied onto the Yin yoga poses for the upper body. So that might then also be an interest for you. So we have a discount, I believe, for 48 hours of 20% after watching this webinar. So if you have an interest in one of those trainings or both of them, then you can check them out with a discount. Are there any more questions about the shoulder flexion and abduction and the poses that come up there? Are all the rotator cuff muscles included in downward facing dog? Well, it depends what movement the arm makes because again, the rotator cuff muscles, they are attached by the shoulder girdle or by the on the scapula. So depending on what movement you make with your arm, that will either decide or determine which muscles of your rotator cuff muscles are used. A penguin is crazy. You mean crazy and good or crazy and bad? Because penguin is then this position. So that is actually internal rotation with protraction. So again, here on the top or on the front can then be felt compression. So we're doing here flexion a little bit with adduction because you're pressing your arms towards the midline. So if this is not giving you the sensation on the back and the outside of the arm and only compression on the front, you could try to kind of lean away a little bit. So you're creating less adduction this way and rounding the upper back in order to see if that is helpful for that area, and then allowing the other leg to go down in any position that you like. Or you move your arm on top of the knee, so you're creating more abduction here, but you're still internally rotating and then falling forward, and then feeling it maybe in this area here. Yeah. Or another way of doing it can be also, the other way around, actually kind of twisting, hooking your arm behind it. And then again, your torso can turn away because you're doing one arm at a time. And then you're allowing yourself to round in order to feel it also in this area. So like you see that I'm changing all the time the orientation of my arm opposed to my shoulder in order to feel it where the area of the or what the pose wants you to feel. But then if your body is resisting it, then listen to it and allow yourself to kind of experiment trying to make the same movement, but then adapt it a little bit into what is causing the problem. What happens in reverse prayer behind one's back? Well, that is, you are doing internal rotation here with extension of the arm. And then also the shoulders are pushed along to the front a lot. So that is not helpful for a lot of people. Sometimes it is felt here, or a weird pull on this side. And then also they want you to place the hands, the palms together. So a lot of movements here come together. Also pronation of the lower arm, so the radius, and then extension of the wrist. And so that is one joint. Then the next joint is the radius, and then the humerus, internally rotation with protraction. So either one of these three joints can cause the problem. So for some, it is the wrist. So if they maybe put the wrists together, that is already less of a problem. Yeah. Sometimes people need more adduction to be able to get the opening on the front and a release in the shoulders, because that is different. The orientation is different here than here from the arm opposed to the shoulder. So again, it is all about finding the right position for your body to be able to feel the pose in the right way or in the right place. Crying penguin, more like. Kirsty. Okay, so I just gave you some variations for penguin. Okay, that's great, Sergio. So as long as it's not too intense what you feel, then you can do it, because that's exactly what the pose is for. But if it feels too much or you feel a sharp sensation in the shoulder, then that's not a good idea. Can a deltoid then cause problems with the behind the back pose? You mean with the hands behind the back? Do we reverse prayer pose? Adriana? Okay. I think that's what you mean. Yeah, exactly. No, because it is, again, the deltoid might get compressed here in this area. So here I didn't talk about that because that's a different part of the body, but the coracoid process is here. And then if you're internally rotating, the head of the humerus comes closer to that pointy part of the bone that is over here. So yeah, that can create a pinching sensation in the deltoid. But remember, if you are a bodybuilder and you have really puffed up muscles, then of course you have limited range of movement because your muscles are too big and they might be in the way. So that can also be the cause of why you cannot bring the arms there. Okay. Yeah, so I hope that helps, Adriana, to know. But all of this, analyzing the shoulder, if you, like I said, if you want more, then in the Yin and Meridian course, where it's all about the upper body Yin yoga poses and all these kinds of movements that you need to do to be able to get into areas of the shoulders. So all these movements where you are, and the penguin and the flamingo and everything, that you are getting into the upper body. So I want to challenge you to kind of in your shoulder when you're doing your yang practice or your yin practice. So any moment that you feel a sharp stinging sensation all the way up into the shoulder and is really localized, that's not a good sign. But if you feel it over an area, going away from an area, then that is a good sign. Or when you're strengthening, that you feel the muscles that you're supposed to use, that is a good thing. But if it's sharp and stinging in one specific point, and especially in the shoulder area, that is not something that you want to go into all the time. And with a repetitive practice like a yang practice, you don't want to go and make the same movement in a vinyasa, for example, all the time in the shoulder, because that will irritate the tendons there, and then you can get an injury there. So it's actually important to know, like, how does the shoulder work and how does the arm, what kind of movements can you make with the arm and the shoulders, and then realize, oh wow, my shoulders go up now, so I'm lifting it up with my arms if I'm not lifting it up with my shoulders, because that is elevation. Here I'm using my muscles to lift my shoulders up. Here I'm just lifting my shoulders up by using my arm. So that is actually what is happening. So once you get a clear idea of like what is happening in the body and what you should feel and what you shouldn't feel, and then adjust the poses accordingly, then you're practicing functionally, and therefore you're not going to yourself, because you're really feeling your body. You're really listening to, oh, okay, that's not the movement that I should make, but I adapt the pose a bit so that I can do it anyway, but it looks a little bit different. So no more questions here. No? Okay. Well, if there are no more questions either, I have told you everything that what I planned today on the shoulder, connected to the flexion and the adduction of the arm and the elevation and the depression of the shoulder. I also went a little bit into the pronation of the lower arm and how that influences then the effect or what you do with the shoulder. Adriana, only where the myth came from. What do you mean, the myth? And Teresa, I mentioned the function. What was the other term? Well, I talked about compression. So where something happens when you bring your arm up and it compresses here with the shoulder, or if it's tension, that means that the tissues are too tight and then you cannot lift your arm up because there is so much tension here on this side. If you feel it on the opposite side of the joint, that is compression. And the function of a pose is what the pose is for, why you're doing the pose. Are you doing the pose to strengthen something, to stretch something, to open up something, to release something? Then actually, if that is your goal, then you should feel that, what you want from it. So if you feel that, then great. If you don't feel it, then adjust the pose to the function that you want it to have, and that it's not creating any painful compression or any other unwanted tensions that are unnecessary. So the myth of softening your shoulders, yeah. The title of the webinar. What do you mean, Adriana? Okay. Great, people. Yeah. See you soon, and thank you for joining. Hope to see you next time. Bye bye.